Hello and welcome to my evidence-informed practice presentation. Teaching is an evidence-informed profession. New teachers are supported by a cache of evidence-based advice created by the Department for Education called the Early Career Framework. It is my aim as an educator to develop students into self-regulated lifelong learners, and I will use practices based on the best available evidence to achieve these aims. The Education Endowment Foundation defines self-regulated learning as having three components: cognition, metacognition, and motivation. In this presentation, I will discuss and justify my professional approach to teaching and learning and classroom management. I will justify my practice using high-quality academic literature and research evidence whilst considering both the benefits and limitations of these approaches. Additionally, I will consider how these practices will affect inclusion. The approaches I will discuss in this presentation are assessment, metacognition, and behaviour management. The teacher standards recognise that the understanding and effective use of assessment is a vital part of a teacher's practice. TARAS states that assessment is fundamental in education to support learning and accreditation. Whilst research suggests that assessment can enhance learning, critics assert that heavy use of assessment is time-consuming and this time could be better utilised for actual teaching. For this reason, it is argued that assessment should do more than just assign grades. Assessment is theorised as inhabiting two distinct categories. Formative assessment is the ongoing assessment of learning used as feedback to modify teaching and learning activities, whereas summative assessment is cumulative assessment, often represented by a mark or grade intended to capture what a pupil has learned and be judged against a standard. Summative assessment is useful for illustrating a pupil's learning outcomes over a period of time and for systemic quality control. However, tests, exams, and evaluation via grading, a hallmark of this type of assessment, can result in negative outcomes for some students, damaging their motivation and self-esteem. These negatives are prevalent when a student has a previous history of poor test performance or results are made public. On the other hand, formative assessment has been found to have a strong positive effect on achievement. Black and William found that if effective feedback strategies were used, then formative assessment would positively impact pupil performance. This type of assessment can be used to plan better lessons, taking into consideration students' strengths and weaknesses. Furthermore, constant feedback can be used for adapting teaching methods or reiterating content. Although there is more consistently positive evidence supporting formative assessment as opposed to summative assessment, this does not mean cumulative retrospective testing cannot be a positive part of the learning process. By involving students in the process, making them fully aware of the assessment criteria and utilising the results to give constructive feedback that allows pupils to improve their learning, it is possible to counteract the negative effect of summative assessment. Kremen and Burnett argue that learners must understand exactly what they are trying to achieve and they should be aware of the importance and meaning of assessment criteria. These researchers also advocate for continual and consistent pupil self-assessment as a means of developing reflective learners. In the example on the PowerPoint, I have used the lower stages of Bloom's taxonomy to create a hierarchy of learning objectives around the topic of multiplication. Using this scale, the students can understand the learning outcomes and assess themselves at the end of the session. I can also use this self-assessment to understand how much my students have comprehended and plan future sessions accordingly. A key area of formative assessment is giving feedback to learners to assess their current attainment and provide guidance on the next steps they should take. Giving feedback has been shown to have positive effects on students' academic performance. However, if the feedback is delivered incorrectly, it can have a detrimental effect. Hattie and Timperley theorise that feedback can come in four forms: task level, feedback about how tasks are understood and performed; process level, feedback about the main processes needed to understand and perform tasks; self-regulation level, feedback about students self-monitoring, regulating and directing of actions; and self-level, personalised evaluations of the learner. It is argued that self-level feedback is the least effective, as it is a judgment on the person rather than on the learning. For example, commenting on a pupil's intelligence as feedback is ineffective as it does not encourage or provide guidance for improvement. Feedback can come in the forms of written comments or spoken words. Written feedback should refer to learning goals and focus on the process of learning whilst giving specific actionable suggestions students can use to revise mistakes or improve their understanding. An example of effective written feedback I would give using the model above is: one of the learning objectives was to find and use a synonym of the word develop in your piece of writing. You have spelt this word correctly, however, you have used it in the wrong context. Revise the sentence using the correct word and then write a sentence using this word correctly. This feedback is both self-regulation level, as it invites the student to correct their own work, and task level. They have spelt the word correctly but used it incorrectly. If a student was unable to access written feedback, it could be delivered in spoken form, following the model. Spoken feedback is immediate and so is best used for low-level knowledge as opposed to complex tasks. Additionally, feedback is most useful when it is scaffolded. The teacher should only give as much help as the student needs to move them forward with the task, rather than providing them the whole solution. Through scaffolded feedback, it is possible to differentiate by support. As we are bound by the education system, it will be necessary to use summative assessment, but I will apply formative strategies to make it as useful as possible for my students. I will utilise formative assessment, especially self-assessment, to promote self-regulation, and I will use targeted, well-thought-out feedback at every point. An important facet of my pedagogical philosophy is facilitating my students to become self-directed, independent learners. The Early Career Framework states that explicitly teaching metacognition is an apt method to achieve this goal. Instruction in metacognition aims to teach students the skills needed to understand and regulate their learning. Children often learn metacognitive skills unconsciously via interactions with teachers, parents, and peers. However, the extent and degree which they acquire these skills can be limited by the opportunities they have to develop them in the home. Furthermore, it has been found that explicit instruction develops more effective metacognition at a faster rate than allowing it to develop by osmosis alone. Muge and Bockove found in a review of 246 studies that metacognition and self-regulating strategies led to 8 months of additional progress in primary-age children. Research conducted by Perry supports this finding, stating that effective teaching of metacognition has a very positive effect on student outcomes, adding that although there is less evidence, a very positive effect between metacognition and pupil well-being is present. Waller suggests this link could be due to the feelings of accomplishment pupils gain by overcoming challenges through the ongoing effort of metacognitive strategies. Research asserts that learning outcomes are enhanced by metacognition as it provides students with the skills to monitor their knowledge, efficiently plan their learning, and evaluate their learning processes. Correlations between learning outcomes and metacognition were particularly significant with strategies that led to self-regulated learning. Metacognition can be theorized as having two components: the knowledge of our cognition, what we know about our thinking, and the regulation of our cognition, the planning, monitoring, and evaluation of our learning processes. An example of an intervention that involves both types of metacognition and draws on empirical evidence from multiple studies is the teaching of reading comprehension strategies. I plan to use explicit strategy instruction of cognitive regulation strategies to improve students' reading comprehension that follow the basic plan, monitor, and evaluate model. During the pre-reading phase, the students will be taught to make predictions about the context of the text. Whilst reading, they will note key words in the text. In the post-reading phase, the skills of summarizing the text and generating questions about the text will be taught. This method has been shown to develop deep thinking in relation to the act of reading and eventually internalizing these strategies. I would initially teach these skills by modeling them to the class. I would then utilize the concept of proleptic teaching by slowly relinquishing responsibility to the students by having them work in groups, then pairs, and then individually, thus reducing the amount of scaffolding given each time. This would occur over multiple sessions, giving students the opportunity to apply and practice the skills. At the beginning of each session, I would activate their prior knowledge of each skill with further modelling. At the end of the sessions, I would have an open dialogue with the students, encouraging them to think about and discuss the elements of the session that helped them most. I would ask questions such as, what strategy did you find most useful and how did it help you understand the text? And model answers such as, I found summarising to be the most useful because it helped me figure out the most important parts of the reading. This encourages their self-assessment of learning processes and also serves as feedback so I can assess their understanding. Metacognitive strategies include allowing pupils to choose their own goals, encourage self-assessment and revision of completed tasks, and comparison of strategies with peers. All can lead them to evaluate and develop their levels of understanding, monitor their progress, and promote self-efficacy. Whilst generic metacognitive processes such as the ones above can be taught for students to apply in all parts of their learning, it can be challenging for them to apply them in practice. Therefore, metacognitive strategies are most effective when taught in conjunction with specific subject content. Whilst I believe there is potential to apply this theory across the curriculum, the main evidence relates to the core subjects of mathematics, literacy and science, possibly limiting its application. Furthermore, it's suggested that by some researchers that instruction in metacognition may inhibit the spontaneous development of metacognitively competent students. Nevertheless, metacognitive strategies have been found to improve student outcomes, well-being and independence. Furthermore, the skills of metacognition contribute to the development of students as lifelong learners and will continue to positively impact their education for the rest of their lives. For pupils to learn together, there needs to be a reasonable standard of behaviour in the classroom. The teacher standard states that effective behaviour management is essential to ensure a good and safe learning environment. It is common that student behaviour and classroom management are mediated via a system of rewards and punishments. This practice is based on behaviourist theory and, specifically, operant conditioning. Operant conditioning states that positive behaviours can be trained using positive reinforcements, i.e., when a pupil exhibits desirable behaviour, they are rewarded. Negative behaviours can be discouraged using negative reinforcement, i.e., when a pupil exhibits undesirable behaviour, they are punished. In the classroom, rewards often take the form of stickers or points that accumulate and lead to extra playtime, whilst punishments often lead to a loss of playtime. Research surrounding this behaviour management strategy is tenuous, and even when the approach works, its benefits are lost quickly after the punishment and reward systems are taken away. This means that whilst behaviourism could work in the short term, it does nothing to teach children positive behaviours for their future. Furthermore, Black and William assert that such reward systems demotivate children, undermining their interest and making them reluctant to ask questions out of the fear of being wrong. Ofsted attribute low-level disruption caused by students, the most frequent reason for implementing behaviour management strategies, to teaching that does not engage people sufficiently. Behaviourism sees pupils as passive recipients that are extrinsically motivated through controlling situations such as punishments and reward systems. However, research suggests that pupils who are intrinsically motivated exhibit high-quality learning, more creativity and better psychological well-being, all leading to higher achievement. Evidence indicates that teachers can help to shape students' intrinsic motivation by allowing them the autonomy to make decisions regarding their learning, thereby giving them a sense of control. In my practice, I will encourage students' choices wherever possible to promote their autonomy and intrinsic motivation with the aim of fostering engagement. I believe this is the best way to ensure good behaviour in my classroom. A simple way to enact this would be for students to choose the book they will read for guided reading or comprehension practice. Another way to give students choice in their learning is by using learning stations. This involves setting up a number of different learning activities, for example, a reading activity, a creative activity, a role-play activity, and an interactive computer activity, all based around the same learning objectives. The students are given the freedom to interact with whichever activities they choose. Ellis and Todd recognise motivation towards schoolwork as the golden learning behaviour to develop in students, as it reduces problematic behaviour and produces higher levels of achievement. A learning behaviour is a behaviour necessary for a pupil to learn effectively in a group setting of a classroom. Learning behaviours, such as motivation, are affected by three relationships. These are a student's relationship with the curriculum, which is predominantly a cognitive variable, a student's relationship with others, which is predominantly a social variable, and a student's relationship with their self, which is predominantly an emotional variable. As a teacher, I must be aware of how these relationships affect the development of learning behaviours. Differentiation with regards to these factors is essential for student motivation. For example, to give a student a positive relationship with the curriculum and thus motivate them to engage with their learning, I must ensure that their work is appropriately levelled and will lead to success with perseverance. Social and emotional factors can influence student motivation through the feeling of community in the classroom. Being part of a learning community that values the individual's progress and not only the end goal helps people to feel motivated. Research suggests that achieving this comes as a result of having an explicit learning rather than work orientation, supporting independent, self-regulated actions and adopting a student-centred approach. Young people with special educational needs that result from difficult behaviour are entitled to inclusive education. Severe behaviourist influenced strategies such as exclusions serve to strip those children of that right and cause them further disadvantage. By supporting these children through a community-led classroom and nurturing their intrinsic motivation, the possibility of a detrimental and endless cycle of punishment can be avoided. Behaviourist techniques for behaviour management may at times be successful, but they do not serve to develop students' self-regulation or lead to good behaviour in the long term. By allowing students autonomy in their learning and understanding how to develop their intrinsic motivation, the need for punishments and rewards are negated. By focusing on cultivating students' intrinsic motivation, classroom behaviour should become self-regulated. The practices I have chosen to talk about and the examples I have given are based on the best evidence available. Furthermore, they all contribute to my personal goal of creating self-regulated learners. Assessment and metacognition are closely linked in my practice. The act of encouraging self-assessment and revision whilst giving detailed and targeted feedback will develop students who are adept at thinking about their learning. This in turn will produce lifelong autonomous learners. Motivation is the golden learning behaviour, and propagating it will have positive effects on every part of a pupil's learning experience. According to Schwelke, successful inclusive practice values students' well-being, autonomy and contribution to society. I believe that these elements are presented and justified in each of the practices I've spoken about. Within my practice, I will further develop these ideas by continuing to engage in academic research and learning from my peers. Thank you for listening.